marks a special moment in time, 25 years of Theatre-Rites. This book promises, I've read some chapters and the outline, but I haven't laid hands on the actual book yet, but it promises to be a seminal work on the subversive art of puppetry. We all know that puppetry is subversive and we love that. And also the essential work of theatre making for children and families. The book explores the really sophisticated thinking underpinning Sue's approach, and it illuminates the mysteries of animating puppets and objects. And some of you in the room, I think you, have experienced Sue's Puppet Whisperer workshops and may have some insight into these mysteries. So, to write the book, Sue and Liam had a series of long, recorded conversations over 5 years. 5 years, that's a lot of talking. And they're about to have another conversation now to tell us how it all started and why, and what was important to include and to explore, and what to reflect on and what to analyse. And it looks back to reflect on the kind of robustness in practice that is needed to signpost and guide and propel this kind of artistic practice into the future through what is now an even more precarious and shifting landscape. So after 25 years, what can Theatre-Rites tell us about, at least for the next 5 and hopefully for the next 25 years? They hope that the launch of the book will also be a launch for the next approaches to practice for this important area of work. And finally, I want to say that it's also interesting to note that Liam and Sue are the co-authors, and the book has been created in the style of Theatre-Rites' own creative process, that is, collaboratively. So in the true spirit of Theatre-Rites, it gives me great pleasure to introduce, in conversation, collaboratively, Dr. Sue Buckmaster and Dr. Liam Jarvis.
Thanks very much, Elizabeth. I think it's fair to say this is the most public of our conversations that we've had over the last 5 years. Lots of talking and many teas and coffees consumed over that time. I guess the word launch is quite interesting, isn't it? I was thinking about the word launch in relation to the world of objects and what that means, which can mean set something free, releasing it into the wild, or setting a self-propelled object like a rocket or a ship in motion. Rocket ships. Yeah. So this has now got a life beyond us and is now out in the world. And this is... So the book is called Theatre-Rites Animating Puppets, Objects and Sites, and it's been an absolute privilege to have this opportunity to have an audience with you over the last 5 years. And I thought we should start maybe by thinking about where the journey of this book began, which was 5 years ago now, in 2016. Can you remember where the idea for this started?
And the simple answer is no. You know, when all good ideas, you actually can't remember where it came from, that seed, that moment.
And it very quickly became very apparent that, well, of course, a book should exist. And actually, I would love to be the person to go on the journey of writing that with you. And then I had the opportunity to work with you, Sue, as part of the Thought That Counts team. So I knew from that experience what it was like to be playmate with you, which was always delightful, unpredictable. So the thought of going through that process of writing the book in that same spirit was really very exciting. Can you remember when we started working on our initial conversations about this, what you wanted the book to do, what you wanted it to say, or maybe the things you didn't want the book to be when it started?
I think that was one of our first conversations, wasn't it? It was like, why are we going to write this? What does it need to be? And I remember sometimes you need to know who your audience are, you need to know who you're talking to. And I thought, well, the audience is everyone. You know, it's like the work You know, there can be an adult, there could be an academic, there could be a student, there could be it won't be for children, but other than that I knew I wanted it to be for anyone. So that's many different languages. And I thought, how can we write a book in many different ways and really try and get some of the theories across? One thing I've always felt, even though with all that body of work and all the amazing people we've worked with who are experts at their field, still children's theatre or puppetry is seen as a simple art form. It's something you do really simply. Because the end product has a simplicity about it. It's like, I think of Picasso's life in order to draw to do his simple paintings. He had to have his life first. And I'm a bit like, it's complex. Everything that comes before the simplicity is complex. So I really wanted to write something with you that was academic and grounded in theorising some of the things that have been going on in my head and in the head of all the people I've worked with. And get it down on paper. So one, to give it validation, to give it respect. Then in turn, it might attract some funding and money. And also just to consolidate that information as well, because you want to hand it over, you want to pass it on. So if you can try and make a theory, try and write it down, the theory of puppet whispering became a theory rather than just an action. And I thought, if we can pass this on, it might inspire further layers of experience. It's just to instigate further play, further playmates. It felt important to do that academically and creatively. And I would only embark upon something as I would with any show or any project if the right playmates are available at that point in time. I'm willing to go there. And you made yourself available. And it just, from that first meeting, the sort of questions you were asking me, the sort of way you were just opening up conversation, we would chat politically, then we'd chat personally, and then I'd remind you of something, then I'd suddenly animate a glass on the table, and it was amazing, the flow of the conversation. So it became a joy to meet you, once a month or once every 2 months. 4 or 5 years, and then of course we actually haven't met for 2 years because we continued writing it during COVID, so it feels very nice to be this close, although we've been told we can't get any closer because the mics might go.
There was something very nice about revisiting, I suppose, a thesis that you wrote. Actually, serendipitously, you wrote a dissertation on psychoanalysis and puppetry. I think it was in 1997, I think, that was written, at the department where I ended up working as a lecturer at the University of Essex Literature, Film and Theatre Studies department, which was a complete serendipity. But there was something really wonderful about revisiting those initial ideas and then seeing how those ideas had developed and evolved. And what do you see, this is a big question, Asca, I'm going to put you under pressure. What do you see as the big changes over 25 years? It was wonderful seeing the journey through the film, from VHS, of course, to digital, yes, but also how the work has evolved and changed. And I suppose there's some core underpinnings in your thinking that became articulated as the puppet whisperer, but even before that, they were sort of there. But now we have a way of articulating those ideas and those methods. And what do you see? Has writing the book taught you anything, I suppose, about how the company has evolved and changed your methods and your practice over the last 25 years?
Yeah, there was something watching Houseworks where you can see the heart of the work. It's already there, you can already see it. It's all about the objects, it's all about the child engagement, it's all about the magic of entering and being immersed. That was already there. So that arrived at that time, working with Penny. So that first 5 years with Penny, I was definitely being mentored and being taught how to run an NPO, the National Portfolio Organisation for the Arts Council, because she had already, so she knew how to do that. And we just found this language that came quite early. The problem was, at that point, the Arts Council or other funders, they were saying, well, what's it about? Where's the script? What's the purpose? And so there was no trust in the process. And I feel like now the difference is there's a trust. You can watch that and go, yeah, okay, you don't know what you're doing at the beginning, but that doesn't matter. As long as we lock you in a room with some interesting people, something will come out and it will be engaging. So that's a huge difference of trust. We're also not asked to perform on somebody else's set, which 25 years ago, children's pieces were asked to perform on other people's set, which I found abhorrent. I couldn't even cope with the idea of using, unless we actually use the other person's set, but we need to ask permission. Things like that, that there was a lot of theatre in education, which I think is coming full circle and coming back. But there were no runs of children's work, unless it was a pantomime. So we did full residencies in theatres, and there was no site specifics for children. So that was a huge one. They were all for adults. So those sort of things we've definitely shifted, definitely new. And then, like you said, the digital, Sleep Tight and Catch Your Breath, and Thought That Counts were all done with, not with projection mapping, but we had to map it all out in the projections. So I'll get into a really, really long, and I had Liam on the Thought That Counts on a mirror, moving the image around to capture the balls, so that they would capture the image. So it was before all of that, but of course now with Robot Boy, we now get to work with excellent projection mappers like Dick. And I suppose the playmates, the group, has become bigger. And one thing that I really didn't want to happen is for that to become departmental. So that what happens if you go and work in a big institution, the departments don't necessarily talk to each other, and someone who made the puppet there, who made the costume there, who made the props here, and I really wanted to still keep this space between those what would normally be represented as departments, and still really wanted to play with the space between art forms, between people, between fields of thought. And I think for me that was something about, the more I learned about different ways of seeing and experiencing the world, the more I would know there's no one right way of defining family, of defining art, of defining what's a polite way of eating. So once I learned that there was no one way, the opportunity to play just got bigger and bigger and bigger. It's like learn the rules and then break them. But that book, for me, it's all the rules that had to be learned in order to gain that sense of trust, truly play with anyone now who I have the pleasure to engage with.
One of the things I love in this book, there's an anecdote, I can't remember where it falls in the book now, but you talk about, I think when you were developing as a director early on in your career, and you were talking about not having the confidence to sort of tell people what to do, but then watching an actor peeling an orange and then thinking, I can direct the orange, I can... something about the possibility of actually putting the object at the centre of a process that also requires everybody slightly to give up their ego to serve something outside of themselves. So something about what happens when you put an object at the centre and how collaborations can form around that, and problems present themselves and solutions can be found by everybody in the room, not just the director. So I was fascinated by the kind of collaborations that objects have enabled in your practice.
Yeah, I mean, it's endless. If you choose an object, then all you have to do is choose a really great group of people to respond to the object. So it's not a script that is prescriptive about who's going to be in it. It's an object, and it can be this glass of water, and I go, well, let's choose 10 people to respond to that glass of water. Well, who might I choose? I might choose a plumber, I might choose a dancer, I might choose a juggler, or I might choose someone who blows bubbles, but it's who might relate to that glass of water the best. Bring out the best in it, and therefore the best in them. So the auditions really are who will work with the object the best. And sometimes the object is a site, sometimes the object is an object, and sometimes it's more of like the brain, a concept but through an object. So the object has become bigger. It might be a brick wall. Who's going to work best with a brick wall? Anyone willing? But yeah, I really found it freeing, and in terms of diversity, that just was the answer. It was like, well, anyone can enter the room. What's the problem? It's inclusive. The object is naive. It doesn't have to have any strict rule about who engages with it.
One of the themes that seems to run through this book is the theme about visibility in all sorts of different ways. The visibility of children. I think one of the important things of the book is an advocacy, more broadly, for experimental and high-quality provision for children. But visibility also of the puppeteer as well, so not hiding puppeteers behind various kinds of partitions, but actually to make puppetry visible, which is also about making, I guess, the labour of puppetry something that we can see, the effort that's involved. And there'll be many people in the room I know who are also playmates of Sue's that will absolutely implicitly know the level of training and craft involved in puppetry, and making that visible, which I suppose is another thing about the book, isn't it? About trying to make that process of training visible so that people can see. And one key thing, I suppose, about the book is capturing your professional training development programme and trying to turn that into some exercises that people can run in their own rehearsal rooms. But yeah, I mean, I suppose, what have you learned about the training process, I suppose, the different ways that you've trained performers over the years? Because I know the programme has developed quite a lot through the shows and through the things that you've learned from the shows and the objects that you've worked with. What I love about your training programme, so I had the great opportunity to sit and observe the training and seeing the objects reappearing that were in shows. Suddenly puppets kind of crop up in the training programme that have been in the shows, and objects. And so what have the shows taught you about training and how training, the possibilities, I suppose, of training with objects?
I think I don't separate things as training or shows or rehearsal or R&D. They're all process. I mean, people want to put the label on the end product of the show, but actually it's still just a launch pad for something else that's going to follow. I mean, some of the things that happened in some of the sites, the legacy of what happened after we left becomes the event. So everything is process, everything is transparent. That's the aim. And of course that's really hard. And it's really hard to ask people you work with to be that transparent and be really like revealing in the work. So remind me exactly what the question was.
My question was about what the shows have taught you about training.
Yes, so because it's transparent, because there's a process of, within each show we almost reveal how it was made. So then that process of learning how it was made becomes the learning that can be passed on, and then it gets put into a smaller version of it that could go to a library, or it becomes part of the training programme. But it's circular. That's the thing that often we don't understand, that all art processes, it's not a hierarchy, it's a circle of activity, and it feeds everything. And so for me, it's just wherever I am, at whatever stage, I'm working with someone, whether they're a beginner or whether they've been an expert for 50 years. It's like I'm learning and so are they. So it's all training, and it's all product, and it's all process. And I think digital is catching up with that. Like this, we're being filmed having a conversation. These have been private. So we have a fly on the wall now, so maybe everyone will understand that art is not just product. Art is a whole thing that goes around it, of which involves so many beautiful people. And there's plenty of work for people. I do feel that this book was also about celebrating divergent thinking. I mean, I think of myself as a divergent thinker. I think of you as a divergent thinker, not someone who stays in a box, who's interested in the space between ways of thinking. And, as Ken Robinson, talked about, all kids are divergent thinking. And then we try and stop it in order to have a more manageable society. So the education system is very limited. So everything we want to do, this book celebrates divergent thinking. So one chapter will be about neuroscience, and the next chapter will be about psychoanalysis, the next chapter will be about death, and the next chapter will be about my ancestry. But it all, it's about going, well, everything matters, and our brains just connect all those things, so why can't a show? And for me it's called the dramaturgy of the playground. Because in the playground, that's how it works. You don't play one thing. One kid says, I want to be king, and some other kid says, well, that's okay, but now I want to be a peacock, and another person comes in and says, let's play hit me, and you go, oh, okay. But everything gets played with in no logical order. The logic is that somebody there thought of it, and it was triggered off by the previous thing. So it's still connected. But kids get that, and I think we've forgotten it as adults. So I really like making work that sort of reminds us as adults to be more divergent in thinking. I think the solution, the way we have to approach the world at the moment, is to think about the connections between things more. To think of the impact of something that you make there that has an effect here, but you must think about the transportation of it here, or the staffing of it here, or the product there, or the material. Everything has to be connected. We can't just make small detailed decisions anymore in any area of our lives. So divergent thinking is going to be the key. So they're really getting it wrong in education. So yeah, I suppose. And do you consider yourself to be a divergent thinker?
Yeah, I do. There's something very interesting about revisiting many of the shows that we just saw in the film, and just seeing the curiosity, I suppose, that's driving that work, and the fact that there's you can never sort of relax because obviously neuroscientists have just entered the room. Well, what does that mean? How do you merge play with facts and data and empirical knowledge, and also how do you explore neuroscience for 4-year-olds or for 5-year-olds? Constant questions that arise with every single show, and yet there are some constants, I suppose, that run underneath the shows, which the book tries to capture in terms of thinking about what happens with objects, the relationship between objects that form really early in our childhoods. So lots of childhood development theory in the book is captured, and psychoanalysis, and I was interested to think about the theories, I suppose, that underpin your practice that are a bit more constant, given all the other variables that keep changing. What is it that kind of keeps you excited about working with objects, and about what we project onto objects, I suppose, as spectators when we're viewing them, especially children as divergent thinkers, what connections they can make, and how revealing they can be. Performers as well, those people who are directly interacting with the objects. And what is it that sort of still captures your excitement, and what are those sort of underpinning things in the book that are a kind of constant through the shows?
I used to not be able to explain it at all, and I'm not even sure if I can explain it this evening. But when I applied to go to art school, they said I didn't know how to talk about my work, so I didn't get in. So I went to do drama instead, and then that was difficult. I didn't know. I knew how to do it, but I didn't know how to write about it. So it wasn't really until I stopped and went on DMA at Essex, where I started to try and find a language for what I did. I used to just say, well, look, it works, doesn't it? That you're watching that thing move and you're engaged. That's about all I could say. And then my partner at the time was a psychoanalyst, so there were lots of books on the shelf about psychoanalysis. And one was Object Relations, which I thought, oh, that's about puppets, so I'll read it. And it's about how we treat each other as objects and objectify things. And so, of course, I realised after reading this huge book, it wasn't about that at all. But it gave me a language. It suddenly gave me a language to describe it, what was actually going on in that moment of projection, the triadic relationship between the puppeteer, the object, the audience. And it was suddenly thinking about that in all sorts of different ways, about the parent space and the child, and how we see things, or whether it's the playing in the sandpit with the toys, and how that's a dramaturgy to be in therapy with young kids, and also just how we do objectify people and sometimes treat people very badly. So I just found myself thinking about objects in a more, what we'd say, intelligent way, a more explainable way, so that I can end up writing a dissertation. And so that did help. But of course, once I'm in the room, And that's what's interesting here, because we're talking intelligently, but also it's a really playful birthday party. So already my mind's going, it just works, doesn't it? It just works. I'm just saying that it works. And yet, but the book was really spending time with you, really trying to find a language for that. You know, some chapters will be people who want to quote it for their dissertations. Other chapters can be because you can read it quite easily. You know, you need to run through it and grab the bits that you need at that point in time. You know, just to have it there as a reference. Because, you know, this is 25 years of thought processes. So they're not all useful all at the same time, and they're dependent on where you're at. If you're a parent being an artist, there's certain things going on for you. Or if you're doing a dissertation, there's certain ways of thinking about your work that you need to do. Or if you're just someone new trying to set up a company, you know, or just going, how to survive as an artist, how to be, you use the word robust. And I think that for me is the biggest thing we can teach each other, is what are each other's robustness. You know, because we all have it somewhere. Being human is to be robust, but also to be human is to be very fragile. So what we need to do is feed each other's robustness. So I've sought that out in others in order to find it in myself. So that underpinning everything for me is that. And I think I found it, well, when I got ME, of course my body was not robust at all. You know, I couldn't physically move, but I was still thinking. And it was within that 5 years that I had 2 children, and I did an MA, and I set up Theatre-Rites with Penny. So this means it's not about physical energy. It told me it wasn't about physical energy. It was about a much deeper energy, a hunger, a need to do something. And it's about allocating, it's about asking for help, it's about tuning your antennae in to attract the right things. So basically, I always come back to, if I could do that in 5 years with ME, I can encourage anybody else in any other circumstance to be robust with what they can do. It's about celebrating what you can do, not what you can't do, and it's about trying to ignore what society needs to stop you doing. And of course, we must be activists. We must be activists, and we must do as much as we can to make whoever can be robust enough to change the world. But equally, we all start the robustness in ourselves before we can do that. So yeah, being robust, that's sort of like a history of how Theatre-Rites became robust.
I found it a really emotional experience writing this book in a way that I haven't found with other academic books, partly because I guess the book starts with the story of you and Penny, and then Penny disappears from the book early on, which she sadly passes away, which was heartbreaking, but also really wonderful to kind of capture her legacy as well with the company, but also how much, I suppose, of your life intersects with the work that you make as well. So one of the things I think that we discussed early on in the chapters, I can't remember which show it was now, it was the one at the end, it was Lost and Moated Land, I think, where the set was designed with lots of kind of soft mattresses and furnishings, partly because you were both battling with illness, and the set was also had to essentially make you comfortable enough to actually get through the process of making the shows.
Yeah, because it's really hard work working in theatre and dance, isn't it? You get knackered by tech. So we weren't that well, and we would cover for each other, both worked part-time. And then by the end, we both had to be there for tech, so we just went, well, let's have some bean bags and we'll get through it. So yeah, it was, we put it into the design.
But that camaraderie, I suppose, throughout the book, you know, in terms of how you collaborate with various performers, how the invitation for people to share their stories through the object, and then the responsibility you have with what you choose to share, collaboratively with the artist, what they choose to share. But it means that the shows are really infused with lots of kind of personal details from the performers, from the artists, from the collaborators that you work with, that resonate with the themes of the show, which maybe is another thing about visibility, how objects kind of bring out in us our desires, our dreams, our history as well. And of course, another fascinating thing is, of course, this book goes back even further than the 25 years of Theatre-Rites, because it also, the last chapter looks at your theatrical ancestry, which takes us back. Where does that take us back to? 5 generations back.
Generations, yeah.
Yeah. What was the experience like? Because I know that I suppose the chapter might have been a way of consolidating some of that process of revisiting your theatrical past. But what was that experience like of writing that chapter and revisiting the experience of your relatives, and how did you?
Yeah, it was a question of whether to include it or not. It was like, who needs to know my history? But at the same time, knowing that all this robustness came from that robustness, and it was 5, generations of theatre makers, and they were robust. And I suppose it was a question for us of, or does it go at the beginning, because it became at the beginning, and we put it at the end, and just it's optional if people want to know, just in terms of the seeds for me, where I got a love for speciality acts, and for play, and for entertainment in working men's clubs, holiday camps, sort of big audiences, big family, inclusive audiences. I wanted to celebrate that, and the past of such inventive clowns, musicians, women that set up companies when the men went off to war and brought saxophones back from America. But I also wanted to sort of put that in context and go, although that was a real magic realism for me, having that history and being told the show will go on, family comes first, it's all in the family, everything, but at the same time it was so full of homophobia, sexism, racism. I would be backstage in the dressing room, and those comedians would come off and be awful. The magician who was sawing his wife in half was just awful to her, and there were dancers who were not admitting anything about their sexuality, even though it was clear. But that's what I grew up about. So although I loved it, I also wanted in my own work to address that, to go, can that exist without all that shit, basically? And it can, and that's really, and I think I spent my whole life having to unpack some of that early stuff, that I was educated by quite a strange bunch of people in a dressing room. They were adorable, but yeah, some of their attitudes were a bit dodgy. But what they did was very clever in their art.
Something very nice about that. I recall we talked about the idea of that chapter being a little bit like that curious box you might find in your garage with sort of hidden detritus in it that you might choose to open or sort of pack away and look at later. Because I know that a lot of the stories revealed themselves to you with curious theatrical props that you found in your grandfather's garage after his passing, and suddenly a history was kind of revealing itself to you. And there must be lots of these garages out there around the UK that kind of are a sort of unauthorised museum of the kind of theatrical past of the UK. So there's something really nice about the idea that, there's a little box hidden at the back of the book that if you open it, you'll find all sorts of things about Sue's past. Really fascinating. Those things, I suppose, I'm also fascinated about your development as an artist through the 80s and through and finding feminism through the 80s as well, and a lot of your work in political activism as well through the 80s with puppets as well. I think the comment about subversiveness that Elizabeth mentioned, the subversiveness of the puppet and the political agency and possibilities of the puppet resurfaces
chapter about
quite a lot, doesn't it? But also in your past as well, about artists that you've worked with, or people that are mentors in your past that have worked in countries where theatre has been censored, or but when they turned to puppetry and started making work for children, no one was really paying much attention to what was going on. So some of the most interesting subversive material was actually happening in children's theatre using puppetry, which was fascinating to me and something I learned through our conversations. What are your thoughts about the subversiveness of puppetry and how that subversiveness is still finding its way into your work in all sorts of ways, I think?
I mean, I love it. I love the fact that, it is hard to be subversive. So the puppet just allows you to. You know, I try and be nice. I don't know, I'm quite naughty once I get to know people, and I'll tease and I'll trigger, but it takes a while to build up trust when you're building work. And some of the later work, it's also been about really personal narrative, where, you know, I don't want to take the piss. I really, you know, want to be very respectful. But there's something when you manage to tap into that subversive. It is a way of having a laugh about something, which, I mean, the refugees that we worked with were the first to say, you've got to have a laugh. We've got to laugh about this. And when we were teching the welcoming party, it felt very uncomfortable because we were just saying, so can you move that lifeboat over, you know, this life jacket over here? Can you pop up there? You know? Oh, it felt awful to suddenly be bossing the concept around that was so sensitive at the beginning, and we were crying in the rehearsal room, and suddenly it was this thing we were just talking about. But it was fine, because we were doing it with people who had been through the process and went, well, of course, we've got to do a tech, and we've got to have a laugh, and we've also got to tell our personal stories. So it's all part of the package. So subversive is something, you know, that you still need to find permission for. The object can make you cry, the object can make you angry, it can say angry things that perhaps, again, in children's theatre you don't want to be too political. They're still learning as political beings, but there's something about the subversiveness of the puppet that can encourage thinking in different ways around a political subject. Like Back on It. It's like, how do you do that for 5-year-olds? When everybody, every adult that turned up was just angry. And they just wanted to say boo to the bank manager, and actually by the end of it the adults with the kids were just loving the fact that the kids were throwing their singular penny into a fountain and making a wish for how the world's resources should be used. You know, so I think it's, you know, subversive. I think sometimes, I don't know, it means so many things, but it's always political. So it's interesting, it's politics but quite hidden. And quiet activism as well, I believe in. Yeah.
I want to think about, return to the idea of launching something. So the book, as well as thinking, looking back, I suppose, at 25 years, is also looking forward as well in terms of what practitioners might take from your process and methods and theoretical underpinnings into their own work, and how they might, and I suppose, of course, now the situation with theatre, particularly in the last 18 months, as many of us understand, has been very deeply challenging and complex, and yet Theatre-Rites have been remarkably active over the last year. I'm sure there's a lot that's been learned from that. So I suppose I'm interested to think about the kind of footholds in the book that were particularly helpful over the last year of making, when you've been working a lot on Zoom, and you've been, as many theatre makers have over the last year. Yeah, that robustness, I suppose, how that's helped you with precarity, situations that are precarious, where actually you're not able to have international collaborators join you because they might be quarantined in their home countries when they were supposed to be working with you. And of course, I'm thinking in particular about the global playgrounds. But yeah, I wonder what you've learned in particular over the experience of the last year that might help other practitioners as well who are still grappling with the challenges of the pandemic. And what I suppose in the book provides some useful footholds through all of that difficulty and through those challenges.
I've been doing the global playground recently, preparing it all on Zoom. And it being another project and it having to change completely, auditioning on Zoom, rehearsing on Zoom until we could get in the room, and then making a digital version as well, all in the same time that we'd normally only make the show, and all the COVID scares and everything we had to do, all the bubbling. It was really challenging. And yet, at the same time, knowing it had to be a piece full of joy, because that's probably what the audience needed. So I had to remind myself every day, go with the flow, go with the flow, go with the playground dramaturgy. If someone's got a good idea, go with it. If someone's absent from the playground, play with someone else. They might have a solution. So we literally took that approach in the room to just make it up as you go along, prepare as much as you can, but be willing to say, that's not here today, or that's not working. can't do it that way. There is always somebody in the room who knows an alternate way, a route, or just an approach. And it's learning to know that that's in the room with you, and to ask for help. And then the magic works. Collaboration is about always knowing someone in the room knows how, in the worst circumstances sometimes. And it's, I've learned it's not always me. I might be called a director, but no way do I know all the answers. I start from a place of not knowing and seeing who does know at one particular time, who's the expert at different points in the process. And that needs to keep shifting. And it's just right at the end I might have to make a call on a decision just because it needs to be made because the show opens tomorrow. So it's knowing that if in any field that helps you ride the wave, because we've got some waves to ride. We've got climate change, we've got Brexit, we've got the cuts in arts budgets, we've got mental health and health issues that have come out of this. We've got a lot of issues coming our way, and we need to be robust because art needs to happen and will happen regardless because it is robust. So it's just let as many people make art as possible and experience art as possible. So it comes down to just how do you find that robustness? The answer's it's just there. When you wake up in the morning, it's there. This makes you feel depressed. This doesn't. Do more of that. But be aware of people who aren't feeling robust. It's quite it's a mindfulness. It's a robustness. It's a thoughtfulness. I don't know. Because I don't think that we know how to do it now. I think we're making it up anew, how to live our lives. Not just art, just to live our lives. We are making it up as we go along now, and the government's not making it up very well. So we do need to just be very alert and very mindful of each other and what our impact is. And I think creativity is fantastic. I'm a real Grace and Perry fan. I've just been to his exhibition. It is so moving that art does not belong to experts. We are all experts at expression. It's just a matter of finding your tool and what you want to say. And then if I can find a group of people from various different areas in life to make a show with, I feel so privileged. So privileged. That I feel very lucky that I'm still trusted to pull people together to do that. But it is because of the people in the room. That building of trust. And you have to trust in yourself, I think, that it's worth it. What you're striving to do. But something like Robot Boy took 6 years. He'll slam the door in our face and say, neuroscience for children, forget it. But it happened. After 6 years, bank on it, the idea with Elgiva in a cafe happening 2 weeks later. So you think, what's the difference? Why is one idea getting snapped up quickly and another not?
We've got an intruder on stage.
Hello. We started with Ernie, which I made the very first puppet for Theatre-Rites. And this is the very last puppet that's been made for Theatre-Rites and was in the Global Playground. This is Terry. Give us a wobble, show it. This puppet's been made by Talk to the Hand. We've worked with many brilliant puppet makers. Thank you, Liam,
Thanks very much,
for being a brilliant playmate.
It's been an absolute privilege, thank you.
Getting this book out there, it's fantastic. Thank you, Elizabeth, on behalf of all board members for being there for us. Thank you, everyone. Staff of Theatre-Rites.